Hello and welcome to Week in Review with me, Gillian Joseph. Kevin Maguire and Andrew Pierce are here to look back at the biggest stories of the past 7 days. So what were your top stories, gentlemen?
Oh, mine was the unfairness of Boris Johnson being hammered by Downing Street for telling the truth on Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Unfairness?
The MPs finally doing the right thing on Brexit, therefore making the entire Supreme Court hearing utterly pointless.
Well, Brexit took centre stage in both the Supreme Court and the House of Commons. There was furious debate and legal argument over when the government should start the process of leaving the EU and whether it even had the right to without the consent of MPs. Sky's senior news correspondent Michelle Clifford reports on the conclusion of the 4-day hearing.
The government's top law officer was back in court the morning after MPs voted to back the Prime Minister's timing on Brexit. But the Attorney-General will still have to wait to hear whether Theresa May will be able to start the process at all. Presenting their submissions, lawyers for concerned citizens, some Britons living abroad, others EU citizens living in Britain. Helen Mantfield QC, representing expats, was to the point. Exiting the EU, she said, would lead to a loss of rights, and only Parliament can sanction that. And what of responsibility to protect the children of Europeans living in Britain, asked Manjit Gill QC. His legal presentation was infused with emotive language, as he warned of what could happen to EU citizens here post-Brexit.
Be ready to pack your bags and go on that day. It's that stark. Because we're not going to give you any guarantees. In fact, we're going to use you as a bargaining chip.
Mr. Reedy.
There was mention in closing by the government of that vote in Parliament. James Eady QC saying it may not be legally binding, but it is legally relevant. The justices must now go away and decide what, if any, bearing it has on the case.
We are not being asked to overturn the result of the EU referendum. The ultimate question in this case concerns the process by which that result can lawfully be brought into effect. We appreciate that this case should be resolved as quickly as possible, and we will do our best to achieve that. Thank you again, everybody. The court is now adjourned.
So what did you make of the 4-day hearing?
It's quite interesting, isn't it, really? I mean, who are the enemies of the people now? Is it the judges upholding the law? Is it the MPs who are upholding the law too? They speak for Britain, the MPs, but the judges are supposed to be the enemies of people. Look, Parliament's sovereign. Parliament should decide to trigger Article 50. We're going to leave Europe because people voted to do that, but the terms and the timing should be decided by MPs rather than the Prime Minister behaving like a medieval monarch.
Well, the whole point of the court case now, it's null and void. It's redundant because Parliament has now voted for the timetable. The judges cannot now say you can't trigger Article 50 because it's going to be as agreed in March, towards the end of March. She showed a little bit of ankle, the Prime Minister. She wants a red line on immigration. We knew that before. That probably means we're leaving the single market. We knew that before. She didn't really tell Parliament anything we didn't know already, but she called Labour's bluff, and she's got a massive mandate now to trigger Article 50.
And I suppose the positive is she's made Labour really show their hand in that Commons vote.
Absolutely. Quite a number of Labour MPs abstained, and there are 1 or 2, I think there were 7 who voted against, and they will now be heavily targeted by UKIP. I think they could be in big trouble.
Look, Labour some time ago had made quite clear that it accepted the result of the referendum in Brexit. The Lib Dems are still challenging it. The SNP are still challenging it for their own reasons. But I think May has made a real mess of this. She should have, from the very beginning, championed the sovereignty of Parliament, which actually a lot of people said they were voting for on the Brexit referendum, and just made a great thing of it instead of appealing, going to all this trouble. I mean, it's fascinating to watch, but all the abuse that people have had for saying Parliament should stand up as being a disgrace.
So that's our top story in a busy news week. So here are 5 things you might have missed out on. The head of MI6 has warned Russian actions in Syria could put Britain's security at risk, speaking for the first time inside the group's headquarters. Alex Younger said the war-torn country faces a tragic outcome.
In defining as a terrorist anyone who opposes a brutal regime, they alienate precisely that group that has to be on side if the extremists are to be defeated. Meanwhile, in Aleppo, Russia and the Syria regime seek to make a desert and call it peace. The human tragedy is heartbreaking.
Labour MP Luciana Berger called for more victims of online abuse to come forward. She was speaking after a 24-year-old man was jailed for 2 years after being convicted of racially aggravated harassment for posting anti-Semitic blogs about the politician. Italy's Prime Minister stood down. Matteo Renzi staked his job on winning a referendum, which would have changed the country's lawmaking process. However, Mr Renzi suffered a heavy defeat in the vote, leaving Italy looking for a new government. John Glenn, the first American astronaut to orbit the Earth, has died at the age of 95. He was only the fifth person to ever enter space and later represented Ohio as a Democratic senator. President Obama was among those to pay tribute to Mr. Glenn. And now for the gaffe of the week. It goes to Boris Johnson. Never shy of an opinion, but this time his views on Saudi Arabia landed him in hot water with the Prime Minister.
There are politicians who are twisting and abusing religion and different strains of the same religion in order to further their own political objectives. And that's one of the biggest problems in the whole, political problems in the whole region. That's why you've got international, you've got the Saudis, the Iran, everybody moving in and puppeteering and playing proxy wars.
Did he say what many are thinking but fear to speak out on?
Well, I think he did.
Yeah, he told the truth. He tells the truth in private, often not in public. Theresa May, the Prime Minister, has just been in the region, and she kowtows to the Saudis, our hand-chopping, woman-veiling allies, because they sell us oil and buy our arms, so she has to be nicer. But she's right. Iran and Saudi Arabia export a very violent form of Islam that is disrupting and destroying that region.
But you see, it's very easy for people like Maguire to condemn our relationship with Saudi Arabia. And of course, it is an appalling regime and it's very anti-women. But billions of pounds worth of business is done between Britain and Saudi Arabia. Tens of thousands of jobs in this country depend on our trade with Saudi Arabia. And what are we going to do? Just give them away, put these people on the dole, destroy communities, let the French take the jobs because they don't care.
But his lot tried
an ethical foreign policy. Do you remember Robin Cook had an ethical foreign policy? It lasted about 3 months when he knew he wanted to sell some planes to East Timor, which was involved in a civil war. It was abandoned.
Come on. Human rights are universal. You should not shut your eyes to what is going on.
What about the jobs?
You do not shut your eyes. And it is ridiculous that a foreign secretary, and as you know, I'm not his biggest fan, but he's cut down for telling the truth.
He didn't answer.
It is ridiculous.
He did no answer about what happens to those
but
jobs.
Is it a contest, though, between the jobs and ignoring human rights?
It's called the real world. It's called, we do business with all sorts of countries that have terrible regimes. What about China? Not great on human rights. What about Russia? We do business with countries all around the world. Why do we always single out Saudi Arabia, which is one of our most important trading partners?
I would halt arms sales now to Saudi Arabia when they're using them against civilians in the Yemen and slaughtering people.
Don't forget, send us your nominations using the hashtag #WinOurWeekInReview. Now, this week, months of uncertainty for thousands of British steelworkers came to an end. They received a 5-year commitment from Tata to guarantee jobs at its Port Talbot site and other steelworks across the country. Sky's Rebecca Williams reports now from the plant in South Wales.
Cheers, everybody. With Christmas on the way, there's finally something to celebrate in Port Talbot, as a deal in principle's finally been reached to secure jobs and investment in the plant. This deal in principle won't just protect jobs, it'll also secure both blast furnaces, and there will be £1 billion worth of investment in Port Talbot over the next 10 years. But there will be a compromise, and that's likely to be over the pension scheme. The plant here invests in every aspect of the community. And for people like Gary Keogh, who's worked at the plant for 3 decades, today's news is a relief.
We haven't slept a great deal. A lot of us TU officials, we haven't gone home a great deal, to be perfectly honest. It is a relief, but there is always our caveat of the British Steel pension.
There is a transformation plan working towards all-weather EBITDA of £200 million. That ensures that we are able to invest into the future of the plant. That also invests that there is nobody gives better guarantee than financial performance, and that's the best job guarantee you can give.
This is an agreement in principle, but the final decision will be put to a ballot in the new year.
And do we think this seemingly good news is all it appears to be?
Well, it's tainted with the end of the final salary pension scheme, which Tata have been after for some time. But it's a great victory for the workers and the trade unions down there, the Welsh Government, the Labour Government, Carwyn Jones, the First Minister, because Tata were going to shut that. And the government, your Tory government at first, was just standing so far back it was going to do nothing. It was going to let it go at the wall.
Well, it didn't go to war. I think it's fantastic news. The pension is an unfortunate compromise, but it's not just that the jobs are protected, it's the £1 billion of investment, which is quite an important vote of confidence. And I know we'll be back in 5 years.
That's performance-based, though,
isn't
it?
And in 5 years' time, we'll be back with another review. But just imagine this news coming just before Christmas too. That town would die without the steelworks, the Tata Steelworks. There's no doubt about it. It is Port Talbot, which is why it's so important it survives.
We've still got to address the issue of cheap Chinese state imports here, them exporting cheap steel here. Of course, the European Union's been better at fighting that than your government, Tory.
Well, and I think the government has to say, if we do go ahead with that ludicrous high-speed rail link, let's make sure we're using British steel. In fact, why not some steel from Port Talbot?
OK, thank you. Time now for Quiz of the Week. Quick quiz for you. Why was there hope for people who think that there aren't enough hours in the day? They don't know. Do you? We'll find out after the break. Welcome back to Week in Review with me, Gillian Joseph. I'm joined by Kevin Maguire, Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror, and Andrew Pierce, Consultant Editor of the Daily Mail. Well, before the break, we asked, why was there good news for people who think that there aren't enough hours in the day? Any ideas?
Clueless.
Not a clue.
Completely clueless.
Yeah.
It's not good
well,
news.
it's always clueless about most things, but on this subject, we're
permanently
united.
That's another matter. Well, it's because scientists are predicting that in the future there will be 25 hours in the day. Do you know why?
No.
Because the speed of the Earth's orbit is slowing.
Right.
So, well, the negative side is that for people who think they'll soon have extra time to do everything, it's not quite that simple. Durham University's experts say we're only gaining 2 milliseconds per century.
We'll be
meaning,
long
dead.
Let's see if you can do the maths. Meaning it will take how long for us to gain an hour?
A long time.
200 million years.
Right.
There we are.
Well, if there's reincarnation...
Yes, well, we'll be long gone. I could always do with an extra 12 hours in the day. There's never, ever enough time.
Can you imagine having 25 hours of Kevin Maguire? I mean, 24 is enough.
Some people would like
maybe
that,
60 minutes more.
No,
I'm sure
that's
there's
60 minutes too long.
A queue of people that might like that.
Exactly, thank you very much.
We'll have to look for them.
He's so rude.
Now, we heard this week that areas of Britain are struggling to cope with integration of diverse communities and the pace and scale of change caused by immigration. Sky's Lisa Holland visited Oldham to speak to people there.
The former mill town of Oldham attracted mass migration from South Asia in the 50s and 60s. But a generation on, barriers are still to be broken down, which even residents admit means parts of the town are virtually segregated.
White people like living their own way, and then obviously Asian people have got their own religions, their own way of looking at things, and that's a choice. That's, at the end of the day, they're British as I am as well.
But you'd quite like this to stay as a mostly white area?
I'll just say that about sounding racist, yeah.
This is St Mary's, an area where black and white residents appear to live happily side by side. If a lot of Asian people moved into this street, how would you feel about that?
I'd want to move out.
Why would that upset you, to live next door to an Asian person?
Can you smell it just now? No, the Asian food and that. They don't.
The smell of the Asian food?
Yeah, the smell of the Asian food, things like that.
Glodwick is a predominantly Asian area of Oldham.
I believe personally it's one of the most segregated towns in the country.
Shopkeeper Ratif Hussain and travel agent Parvez Nazir are neighbours. They say some residents rarely leave the community. People are segregated, aren't they?
By choice. You know, they've got a choice of where they want to live.
And they want to live in segregated communities?
Yeah, they want to live in segregated
why is
communities.
That?
To be honest with you, it's a lot of people around here feel safer together.
Residents say segregation doesn't make where they live no-go areas. Though many are in a comfort zone they will never leave.
Does that report surprise you?
No, I think it was a good report, actually, and she didn't pull a punch. It's Louise Casey, who I think is called the Cohesion Czar or some such thing. And she was making the point, too, that some of the problems of multiculturalism, segregation, is that it reinforces some pretty bad habits in some of these communities, for women in particular. So some women, she said she met, weren't allowed out the house because the husbands don't let them. They're not allowed to get jobs. They're not allowed to go and learn English. And she was saying, as a prerequisite now, immigrant families should be encouraged, made to learn English, because that will help them, because a lot of those people are living in poverty, they can't get jobs, and part of the problem is they don't speak English.
Yeah, and it's a shame the government cut English classes, but now in a fully multicultural society, so you want everybody to be involved, and there is segregation. You get it in working class white communities where there's poverty, little educational opportunities, and you can get it with some groups who arrive. And this has happened all through our history with the Huguenots, the Irish, Jewish people coming from Eastern Europe, people coming from the West Indies, and they will integrate down the line. But you've got to push it. You've got to push for it, and you've got to entice them out as well, and not just condemn them. And you know, we need people to mix. We're much better when everybody mixes.
OK, let's take a look at the newspapers now and your choices of the top stories. Andrew, another week for Donald Trump.
It had to be him. Who else could it be, really, personally? He won that election against all the odds. He upset the apple cart. He upset the Republican Party. He wasn't supposed to win. I think he's been quite measured by comparison since he's become president-elect, with some of his outrageous utterances during the election campaign. But he's the president-elect of the United States. In a few weeks' time, he's going to be the most powerful man on the planet. Of course he had to win it. And Nigel Farage was apparently a strong contender.
Yeah,
he was an important person here.
Look, love him or loathe him, you've got to admit he's made his mark. And I'm still upset a lying, racist, sexual predator will be in the White House, and instead of draining the swamp, he's filling the Washington swamp with all these loony right-wing mates. But just a word of warning, he's Man of the Year this year. Hitler was in 1938. And it went a bit wrong, didn't it?
Person of the Year, I must correct you.
Person, you're quite right.
It changed, it's no longer Man of the Year. But I mean, it's not about a popularity contest. It's who's had the most influence, for better or worse.
Stalin got it a couple of times.
I suspect if we had had it in this country, Times Person of the Year in Britain would probably be Nigel Farage, because he is the reason we've got Brexit.
Yeah.
I'd vote for him.
Kevin, the end of Network Rail, is it? Discuss.
Transport Secretary Chris Grayling, who I think is in the fingertip club as he tries to hang on to his job in the Cabinet, has decided that a new line between Oxford and Cambridge will be completely privatised. Network Rail, which is publicly owned, won't be doing the track. I think it's a mistake. He wants to cherry-pick bits of Network Rail, I'm sure, to privatise. The maintenance had to be brought back in-house to be done publicly because it was such a disaster in the private sector. And I fear he's now going to go down the same route and make the same mistake.
This reminds me of Nero fiddling while Rome's burning, because while he's making this speech about one small railway line, we've got the worst industrial unrest on Southern Railway we've ever had. So both ASLEF and the RMT are on strike. 4 days, there's going to be strikes all the way up to Christmas, and the government are washing their hands. They're doing nothing about it. Commuters are in utter despair, and you've seen a Tory MP, a loyalist, Bob Neal, calling for Chris Grayling, the Secretary of State, to be sacked because it is such a shambles.
Look, Grayling could halt that industrial action with a click of his fingers by going to talks.
There's absolutely no reason for them to be taking industrial action.
Because that's a franchise they've given out. It's directly managed. They're using a private company, and they've deliberately picked a fight with the workers. They deliberately picked it, and the commuters are suffering as a result.
It's appalling.
Let's move on to junk food advertising, but online.
Yeah, well, social media is now at last being brought into line with the rest of the media. So junk food targeted at children under the age of 16 has long been banned on television. It's going to be banned now in newspapers, but on social media too. And it's food that's high in fat, sugar, salt. And I think it's a pretty good idea because it's aimed at trying to tackle the growing obesity crisis amongst our children. There are so many fat kids at school because they're eating the wrong food, and the advertisers have shamelessly targeted them on social media.
And they spend more time on social media than
much
they do
more.
with traditional media.
Facebook has to face, and the others have to face up to their social responsibilities, because now kids are more likely to grow up obese than they are to get a decent job, own their own home, or get a good pension.
Finally, have you got one of these? A £5 note. with a little etching and
He only
engraving.
has 20s and 50s in his wallet. I've seen it before. There, this is fantastic. 4 of the new £5 notes have a little etching of Jane Austen on them, and they could be worth 50 grand if you have one. That's a Jane Austen. If you have Steve Austen, that's $6 million you'll get for it. But nevertheless,
You have to be
people
so
who've got a
late to
certain
get
age
that
won't
reference.
get that.
you could just
Look it up, kid.
just see it. You could just see it, the engravings. But it's fantastic.
And
I'll have everyone looking.
what will those ludicrous vegans do if they get that fiver? Will they cash in the £50,000?
Yeah.
Or will they say, oh, I can't touch it because it's got animal fat
They
in
might
it?
conveniently forget their principles
Funny
if
that.
£50,000
I still
is
don't
in the
understand
mix.
why vegans are upset about this, because they're not meant to be eaten.
No, but I don't think we should have animal products in notes.
Oh,
But
get
animal
over
products
it.
have got
Get
too many
over
things.
it.
I'm with him. Hindus object too.
Get over
because
it.
it's beef.
Well, thanks for taking us through the newspapers. What about your ups and downs? Let's start with you, Andrew.
It's got to be giraffes, because there's been this astonishing report saying that they are facing extinction because of poaching and loss of wildlife habitat. But because of this report now, it actually means there's going to be huge efforts and conservation to save them, because their numbers have gone down dramatically. I don't know if you've ever seen a giraffe. They are adorable creatures. They really are wonderful.
They're like pantomime animals,
Yes,
aren't they? I mean, all a
big
bit ungainly.
long
fantastic.
eyelashes.
They're so lovely.
Yeah.
So it's good that this report's come out.
Okay, so we're sending giraffes up.
This is an astonishing story. This student called Faiz Siddiqui, 38, he's suing Oxford University for £1 million because he said his failure to get a first-class degree has cost him £1 million in lost earnings. He's suffering from insomnia and depression.
I feel sorry if he's unwell. But what's happened now with the charging of fees is people believe that buying degrees and you pay your money, there's almost an expectation you're going to get one.
But do you know when he took his degree? In 2000. Why did it take him 16 years to realise it's the university to blame
But not only
for
did
his
he say
failure?
the teaching was bad, he also said the teaching was boring. I don't think you can get a refund for that.
No, well, quite.
Come on, we've all blamed boring teachers, haven't we, when we haven't done so well?
He got a 2-1, though, didn't he? He got a 2-1.
Yeah, it's all right.
More than I
bad.
got.
That's what I got.
I didn't get anything.
No.
Kevin, right, let's move on.
But you didn't go. You've got to go to university to get a degree.
It's true.
This is Emily Thornbury.
Lady Nugie,
Emily
as
Thornbury,
she's known by her husband.
who was fantastic at Prime Minister's questions and will now challenge those who've always run her down like him. She did very well.
And not a single questioner on the list was a Labour MP.
She did very well. You just can't stand Council House people who do well.
Did you not think her performance was good, though?
It was better than I expected.
He's conceded.
It was better than I expected, and frankly, anything is better than Comedy Corbyn, who's useless at
Better than
Prime Minister's
expected
questions.
from Andrew Pierce means 5 stars, Oscar winning, get your BAFTA, gold medal.
And wasn't she better than Corbyn?
He's actually not been bad in recent weeks, but he's very hit and miss. She was a big hit.
She did ask the same question several times, though, didn't she?
But that was it, perseverance, because the government couldn't answer whether or not we're going to stay in the customs union in Europe.
Kevin, what else?
Going down is cricket. Always considered itself a gentleman's game. They're going to introduce red cards because there's so much bad language, people threatening to hit each other with bats. It's just gone like football and rugby.
Did you notice that little sexism thing? Gentlemen's game. Women play cricket too.
They do, but I think you will look at this picture and you will see there are 2 men playing cricket.
Kevin, that was
then.
from 100 years ago.
Look, it's a bit like that now. Is that Cameron, actually?
No, the women's
Cameron,
game is very, very...
There is, okay.
Yeah, Rachel Hayhoe-Flynn, very important. She's in the House of Lords.
Second time
She's
in the
the
show.
captain
I'm
of
embarrassed.
England's women's cricket team.
Unintentional sexism. Okay, I'm guilty. There we are.
Never get
As long
it
as
from
it's
me.
unintentional.
It's sitting next to him. I've caught his bad ways.
So we are sending this down?
Yep, cricket.
There it goes. There it goes. Now, don't forget, you can send us your nominations using the hashtag #WeekInReview, WNR. Thanks for joining us on our review of the week. We'll be back for more next week. But for now, it's goodbye from them.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me.